Well, we're continuing this sermon series of the I am statements of Jesus. Last week we looked at Jesus saying, I am the light of the world. And this week, I am the door, I am the gate. So I was thinking about some famous gates and some famous doors, some of which I have been to, others I have only read about, but I dream about visiting. They're on my bucket list. But I'll start with this one. And maybe some of you have been there. St. James Gate. Anyone been through the hallowed grounds of St. James Gate in Dublin, Ireland? Yes. Originally leased in 1759 to Arthur Guinness at £45 per year for 9,000 years. That was the lease on this area of this section of Dublin. Pretty good deal, I would think. St. James Gate has been the home of Guinness ever since and was, at one time, in 1886, the largest brewery in the world. Fun fact. I also have a certificate somewhere that they gave me, because I learned to pour the perfect pint. It's a whole thing you can do there. And I figured with St. Patty's Day tomorrow, it's very appropriate. It was a very memorable gate. And literally, there is an entrance, there's a gate, St. James Gate, and you walk in and you have yourself a nice time. All right, how about this one? The portals of Notre Dame Cathedral. Perhaps some of you have been there. Each portal depicts various characters and scenes of the Bible. In the center is the Last Judgment, which is probably the most famous of all of the large doors of the Notre Dame Cathedral. Now, how about this door? You might recognize this by the address, 10 Downing Street. Yes? One of the most important political buildings in the world. Since 1735, the location has been where British prime ministers have worked. The building, if you have been there, or you can Google it, see some pictures, is kind of unassuming from the exterior. But behind the famous black door is a large labyrinth of rooms and staircases, once, of course, traversed famously by Winston Churchill and other world leaders. Now, how about the Imperial Gate? The Imperial Gate, also known as the Emperor Door, is made of oak and bronze frame. It's the largest door inside the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, Turkey. And it was once reserved only for the emperor and his procession. No one else could enter through that door. The door dates to the 6th century, and legend has it that it is made of wood from Noah's Ark. I don't know about that, but the door is magnificent. Maybe you've seen the Holy Door. It is one of the entrances to St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican City, and is open only during a holy year, which is declared by the Pope, and typically occurs every 25 years. The door is not open very often. The door is hidden behind a cement wall until the holy year, and on the first day, the barrier is removed, and visitors can walk through and experience a symbolic transformation that is quite unique. But here's another door that also brings great transformation. 21 Munson Avenue, Morrisville. Meals on Wheels of Lamoille County. As we heard from Summer, providing over 50,000 meals annually through home deliveries and fresh lunches in their hub dining room. These doors and the doors of that organization have real meaning and impact and actually change and bless people's lives, from the volunteers who walk through to the guests who come for a meal. In the Gospel of John passage that Adela beautifully read, thank you, we find in chapter 10 they're known as shepherd songs. And we're going to look at the first two this Sunday and the third one next Sunday. So the first picture that we see in this 10th chapter of John is one of a shepherd in the morning of a village in every traditional Middle Eastern village during the time of Jesus. I'm grateful for the scholarship of Dr. Ken Bailey in a wonderful book called Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes. And he describes this scene in this context, which is very helpful. Now, everyone back then in these little villages would have 2 or 3 sheep, because that was common, and that was their winter clothing. However, you really can't herd 2 or 3 sheep because you couldn't afford the help that was required. So here's what they did. A whole group of people on one particular street in a village would join their sheep together and form a flock. Now, usually the streets back then were blocked at one end and at the center of the village, and then they would open up on the other end to pastures. And the homes were side by side. They were small homes, roughly the size of a one-car garage that we would be accustomed to, and side by side, and they shared walls with their neighbors. And the back entrance of their dwellings would open up and go into this pretty narrow alleyway. The alleyway would then funnel into the open pasture lands. And for each of these village sections, generally 1 young man or 2 young women would be responsible for leading the sheep out early in the morning. They would come to the end of the alley, they would give their call, and then the gatekeeper, hearing the call, would open all of the gates for all the sheep. So the sheep would leave the dwelling places, go through the gates, and now, of course, the sheep would recognize the call of the shepherd. If it was a foreign or a strange call, the sheep wouldn't leave, even if the gates were open. They would wait to hear the call of their shepherd because they knew it. They were trained to listen to that call, which was very specific, and then follow. And all the sheep would follow the shepherd out into the street. And as they're all out there, the shepherd starts their walk across the countryside. And when they come to a valley where there's food to eat, they stop. And then they start moving very slowly so that the sheep will have time to eat as they go along. They're not hurried. They're following the lead of the shepherd. And that's a kind of standard pattern of sheep and shepherds and village homes. And that was the scene of the opening parts of Jesus, saying, I am the gate. I am the gatekeeper. Now, the second text paints another common picture in the time of Jesus. By February, the rains would have mostly stopped, and every shepherd was trying to find something for the sheep to eat. As you can imagine, in the summer months, and certainly by September, everything in the open countryside that's edible, the sheep have already eaten. So the shepherds need to continue to go further and further and further to find something to eat for their flock. Now, what would happen is that soon most of the entire day was spent coming and going and being very counterproductive. The sheep were using up tremendous amount of energy, always on the move, and they're really not eating much because they don't have time. And so the shepherds back then would do one of 2 things. They would either find a cave somewhere in the pasture land in the countryside, far away from the villages. They would find a cave and they would build a low wall across the front of the cave and leave just a small open space so that they could count the sheep that go into the cave at night. They would create this space because it wouldn't make sense to go all the way back to the village, so they would find this place out there. And whichever shepherd would get there first generally was allowed to use the cave. Since this area, no one owned this land. And so a good shepherd would go first. A good shepherd would brave the elements and be on the lookout for this good place to be able to have the sheep rest and find pasture and be safe. So that was one option. A second option was that multiple shepherds would get together and they would build an enclosure, usually large enough for around 100 sheep. They would then build a fairly high wall and weave some thorns at the top of it so that a dog or a wolf wouldn't try to come over the wall because the thorns were just too high. And they would build and keep a small entrance for the same reason, that they can count the sheep as they come in, making sure that every single sheep enters into safety. Now, guess where the shepherd would sleep? They would sleep across the entrance. Directly across that small entrance, the sheep are on the inside, safe, hopefully well fed, nourished, protected. The shepherd would literally lay down his or her body right in front and become the door. When Jesus says, "I am the door," his audience understood exactly what that meant. And for the sheep, that would be a really good day. Being guided and led away out by a loving shepherd who calls them. They hear the shepherd's voice, and they arrive in a place of safety. They find pasture. Not every day it was like that. Some days are really difficult. We understand what that's like. Sometimes we're sheep. We spend and exhaust ourselves going from this place to that place, back and forth, in pursuit of things that are actually quite fleeting, often hard to find, elusive, and never really satisfy us. And Jesus says that he is both the gate and the door. He's the one that gives his life for the sheep. The sheep whom he knows and protects and loves deeply. He is the one who gathers the sheep and cares for them. And he's also how the sheep enter in and are kept safe. The last verse that Adela read, Jesus says, "I have come that we may have life and have it abundantly." That is so important for us to hear and to believe that message, that good news. Because the reality is, we have many competing voices calling to us each and every day. Sometimes they're voices of other people. Sometimes they're kind of our own voices. And you know what these voices sound like. They want us to do more, to earn more, to accomplish more, to buy more, to be more. If we listen to those voices, we will be exhausted. Some of us are already exhausted because of those voices and chasing after that which will never actually satisfy. We spend our days and spend our years and spend our decades trying to find pasture, because ultimately that's what we all want. And not just for ourselves, for other people as well. That they too can experience life to the fullest. A life of safety and protection where they are nourished, their needs are cared for, that they too are included in the flock, that they are known and accepted and loved. Those other compelling but competing voices, when we chase after those, what we do experience is they really do steal, kill, and destroy our joy. Sometimes our sense of identity, our sense of self-worth. It never leads us down a good place. But when we hear and learn to hear the voice of God calling out to us, and yes, we have to have ears that are willing to hear and hearts that are open to listen and to discern God's call, the voice of Jesus calling, often calling our very names, often calling us to follow him, sometimes to uncomfortable places, calling us to leave our comfort zones of the villages and to follow Christ out into the world where we can be sources of love and light and empathy and compassion and mercy. I know from firsthand experience and from the testimony of many people that when people enter the doors of Meals on Wheels, they feel cared for. They feel known. They feel loved. They feel God's blessing on them, even if it's just for a moment. But the hope and the prayer is that that stays with them throughout the day, throughout the weeks, and throughout their life. My prayer is that when people enter the doors of 137 Main Street here in Stowe, that they will encounter the presence of Jesus, that all people will know that they are welcome, that they are safe, they are nurtured, and they are nourished, so that we can experience life to the fullest, life abundantly, life everlasting, as we listen to the voice of Jesus, our Good Shepherd, now and always. Amen.